Welcome students to another video lecture with Mr. Connect. Our 10.5 lesson is what we're about to learn about. And the real big focus on this lesson is going to be teaching us how to try to create experiments that limit the amount of bias when we create them, and how to identify which type of experimentation is extremely biased and cannot be used. So I'm going to go ahead and ask, I'm only going to show this left screen so far, so pause here and copy down what you see, because there's actually two tables that we'll have to copy down in a second. So pause here and copy down what you see. All right, welcome back, students. So what we're trying to do is learn how to select what type of sampling technique has occurred, and why this is so important in our society is a lot of the time a biased sampling technique gets used and then is tried to explain to our general population how it is affecting everything, but it's not a viable experiment. So that is why it's vital that we learn how to identify biased versus unbiased sampling techniques. So we're moving on here. I'm going to show two slides ahead, and it is two separate sections. It's going to be, the one on the left is going to be our unbiased samples here. So these are techniques for unbiased sampling, and please make sure that these little tidbits are definitely fitting right to the left of our words here. So like randomly select by computers is right here. Then we have our other short phrase right next to stratified. Ooh, that is not what I wanted it to do. And then the last one, sample and equal interval, is right there. Then we have our biased sampling, which only has two. So it's very important, one, that you leave a lot of space for this when I ask you to copy it down. And two, leave a little bit for us to edit as well. So I'll also make sure that these are aligning right there. Okay, go ahead, pause here and copy down what you see. Okay, welcome back. Stretch that hand out. Thank you so much for getting this table written down clearly and legible, because remember, if you didn't, I'm going to make you redo it. Okay, so first thing, I'm going to go over some of these sampling techniques, but it's important for us to realize that if you have an unbiased sample technique, we are actually able to predict what happens to larger populations. Again, coming into our video lecture, if you remember when we talked about our mean absolute deviations, we talked about how scientists create small experiments and then are able to extrapolate that data, so make that data go wider to larger populations. And the reason they're able to do that is when they've created a very viable and unbiased sampling technique. So we'll talk about that more in class, but the first sampling technique we have is unbiased, is sample random sample. And the way I could paraphrase that is it's randomly selected by a computer. So it's important you realize that when you have a simple random sample, there is some sort of randomness to the selection. No human is biasly choosing. Humans, we're going to learn, always have bias. So when we create experiments, our goal is to limit the amount of bias in an experiment and also discuss what those biases could be. And again, you'll realize a lot of this lesson sounds like math and science. And it should sound like math and science. It's where these two fields blend together. We're having to use math, but we need to know that how these experiments get set up can affect the math later. Okay, our second type of unbiased sampling is a stratified random sample. And we can perform this anytime they're separated into equal groups, and then we somehow select inside those equal groups the equal number of representation. And I'm always trying to give some sort of an example of the experiment in this last column here. Our third type is going to be the systematic random sample. And this is some sort of like interval, like you're going to stand at a door frame and select every 10th individual. No bias, no choosing who that 10th person is. You're just counting 10, marking that person, and asking them some sort of survey. And this is going to be how we can create surveys. So if we use any of these three pieces of data, it's important for us to realize that we have used an unbiased sampling technique, and there's able to use some predictions for the whole population if we did that. Okay, moving on, we have our biased sampling technique. Oh, biased samples. The key to biased samples is they sometimes seem like a good science experiment, but they're not. It turns out that they can look really good on paper and how you set them up, but they're really not good at all. So this first one is called a convenience sample, and we like to call it the convenience because it's just the easiest way to do something. So you were just like, I have to survey, I'm going to ask 10 people in the very front of the line. That's not the same as a systematic random sample because you conveniently just selected 10 people in front versus somehow you randomly chose those 10 people. So that's how those two sampling techniques differ. The second unbiased or biased sample technique is going to be this voluntary response sample, and this is the most dangerous and the one that gets used the most because it looks really good. And an example of this is if someone sends an email out to everyone, it looks like we've asked everyone to take this survey. It turns out not everyone actually responds. So that is a very biased sampling technique. And we'll talk about why those people respond normally and why that actually ends up being biased in the end. So we have these 5 sampling techniques we have to learn about. 3 of them that are unbiased and 2 of them that are biased. And now what we're about to do in our problems is try and figure out whether a biased or unbiased sampling technique's been used, say what sampling technique it is, and if it's unbiased, we're going to try and predict what happens to the whole population. So let's go on to our first example for this lesson. And go ahead, pause here, copy down what you see. Welcome back. So again, words really matter here. So I want you to circle everything you think matters in this word problem before I start to analyze it. Is that enough time to circle? If not, keep on pausing and try. Okay, welcome back. So first off, the problem goal is identify if this is biased or unbiased, and then which type of sampling gets used. So we just read the directions to make sure we're following the right path. So let's go see how you circled. First thing we're trying to do is determine the types of music concert halls customers so like best. So we're trying to find out types of music concert halls customers like best. And in this example, this study was performed from all the people attending a country music concert. I'm going to ask that you pause here, read through these 5 sampling techniques, and try and tell me which one got used. Okay, welcome back. So did we use a biased or unbiased sampling technique? Which one did you think? If you said biased, you are correct. This is biased sampling. And again, the key is in the words they used. This turns out to be a convenience sample. This is just a convenience sample. And why this is a convenience sample is we were trying to find out best from concert hall customers, and this was only done at country music. So I want you to think to yourself, if we did a survey for the best music possible only through a country music survey or a concert, what do you think the people will likely answer with? If you said country, you're right. And that's because that's the concert they're at. So clearly they like country. It may not be their best, but it is one of their preferences. So we would have this bias towards country in our survey results. Kind of makes sense? If not, make sure to write any questions you're having down on the margins. We'll keep moving forward though. So now we have our last example of this note. Example 2. And what I need you to do again is pause here, copy down what you see, and very similar, you're going to try and tell me if this is biased or unbiased. And if it's unbiased, we're going to learn what we can actually do with our answer. So go ahead, pause here, and copy down what you see. Okay, welcome back. So we're analyzing computer chips. This kind of seems like what an experiment would be done on an actual production line. So first off, we have 7,500 computer chips we're studying. The manufacturer sampled every 150th chip at random for defects and found that 2 were defective. What is this, biased or unbiased sampling? Yeah, if you said unbiased, you are correct. This is an unbiased sampling technique. So I don't think the question asked, but do you know which unbiased sampling technique this was? Yeah, if you said systematic random sample, that is, we have some sort of randomly generated sample that's being created because we're just selecting the 150th no matter what it looks like every single time. Okay, so now that we have learned that this is a systematic random sample and we did it correctly, it's unbiased, what we can do is we can extrapolate to how many defective chips actually exist in the entire 7,500 computer batch. And we're going to learn how to do this in class. But what you want to realize is we're going to use a skill from 5.7. So before we do that, can you make sure that you're looking at 5.7 before coming into class for this lesson and learn how to use that skill again? Because it's going to look like it's a ratio equaling another ratio. And we're going to set up on the top defects and total sampled. And then we'll have defects in total and total computers. And we're going to use, if you didn't check 5.7, cross products to solve this problem. So again, we're going to put the numbers in here real fast because there is a challenge on finding the 150th. Some of you are going to be like, oh, it's 150. It's not. The number total sampled first will have to be discovered by dividing 7,500 by 150 because that's the number of things we sampled. So that's the challenge in this problem. We're going to solve the rest of it later. I didn't want this to get too long. Thank you so much, students, for being a part of another video lecture. And go ahead and write any questions you may have and ask them in class. I'll talk to you soon.